Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today we got with us Antony Gordon. Antony's got 25 years of experience in working with high net worth individuals, family offices. He's a graduate from Harvard Business School, which we're going to talk about in a minute. We're the anti-Harvard crew over here, but we've got Antony here. Worked with a number of funds, launched his own funds, has done all sorts of stuff for famous athletes, celebrities, helped manage their money, has done a lot of great things with Israel and all sorts of groups. We're going to dive into a lot of different topics today. With all that being said, though, Antony, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Bridger, it's a great honor and a pleasure. And I think I'm going to hire you as my PR agent after that intro.
Well, you need some help, too, with this outfit. I mean, you got what? You got a football jersey on or something. I didn't. So, Antony, welcome on. I want to ask you first off, I know you do a lot of stuff. You travel, you talk about money, you talk about politics, you help people in all ways, shape, and form. I want to ask you, though, about the current state of America and where we are politically, but also financially, right? We've had an enormous amount of money printing. We've had markets that just don't make sense right now. I'd love to get your thoughts and start diving into the current state of America and where you think we'll be in the next year, 18 months, 24 months.
Okay, so an outstanding question. I'm going to come at that. I'm going to respond, I think, we'll keep the business side as one response, but I want to give a macro response as someone, as you well said, Bridger, that speaks to a ton of folks on the public speaking circuit, has my own podcast, interfaces with, I think a broad spectrum of folks. I think it would be safe to say that I've got some sort of my finger on the pulse. Here's what my sense is. People have lost tremendous trust. There's been a lot of things that have been said that haven't been honored. There've been bait and switches, and what I'm seeing as we hopefully come to the end of this pandemic, with a very volatile transition in the political spectrum, is that people want want authenticity, want transparency, and they really want people to play their cards face up, because I think that a lot of people feel duped. People have exercised their vote for folks that once stay in office, then flip-flop. And hold on to that thought, because it's going to be relevant to a few things that I'd like to share with your listeners when it comes to raising capital and when it comes to telling the story. The one word that I'm going to strongly recommend that your listeners, at least in their head, take out of their vernacular is the word pitch. A pitch book pitch, because no one wants to be sold. The idea of being sold is the antithesis of I have a need, or I have pain points, or I have some capital. I'd like to get the best return on my capital. And it dovetails back to my comments about trust. So that's the macro socio.
So we've lost trust in every way, right? We've lost trust in politics and financial things and everything. So where do we go from here? Do you just think the people that are most transparent, that are playing the cards face up, will win going forward?
So I think that's part of it. That's number one. Number two, I think that there unfortunately is a whole subculture where people are dead scared to say what they really feel and articulate what they're feeling. Why? Because we've got a cancel culture. We've got, unfortunately, a lot of folks out there that if you have a difference of opinion to me, it doesn't mean, Bridger, you have a different view. It means you're evil, you're bad, and I have to neutralize you. So because people are self-censoring, what I think, just a few thoughts, if I may, to emerging managers and how this dovetails into emerging managers is the following. I think every single one of your listeners should go through the following exercise, and I believe it's germane to your question. They should ask themselves the 4 W's. What, why? What? The first what is my alpha? What is my value proposition? That's literally your 90-second elevator premise. We live in the Ritalin ADHD generation. It has to be literally 2 minutes. What's my value proposition? Number two, the next W is what is my differential? What's my beta? So alpha, beta, how do I differentiate from the hundreds of other either emerging managers or other people knocking on high net worth people's doors and saying, I'd like a piece of your discretionary capital. And it has to be a very clear differentiator. Don't speak in euphemisms. Don't try and be all things to all people. The third W is why me, meaning there has to be something unique about Bridger Pennington that is attractive enough to differentiate you from other folks. And the fourth W is why now? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean, we all know you can't time the market, but there's something unique about what's going on today where you said it very well. There's trends, there's, people, what was accepted 10 years ago is passé today. So people, there's no question that there's something about the moving goalpost. So again, I think those are the four W's that every one of your listeners should ask themselves. And then go ahead.
I won't use the word pitch, but when you're presenting an offering, those are astute, and especially coming from you. I mean, you've worked with a lot of high, which I want to get into in a minute, a lot of high net worth individuals, a lot of celebrities, a lot of exclusive people that are hard to get in contact with from someone like me. I'm guessing that's a good way to go about presenting things to them. Is that right?
That is, firstly, that's most of the folks that I've over the last 15, 20 years are, as you well said, certainly some of the most high profile personalities in sport, entertainment, and in some of the wealthiest families in the world. They've heard everything. Their eyes are going to roll back. If you're sharp, you're quick, and don't be scared of silence. If there's something about, I have to keep rambling because if there's silence, it means that I don't know my stuff. I think that there's two other very, very important points that I want your listeners to hear that I'm not sure they've heard up until now. And that is the most important thing when it comes to raising money, when it comes to relationships, is the first thing you need to focus on is to make a relationship capital deposit. So many people walk into a room and the first thing is, did you close? Forget making the withdrawal. You need to basically, the person with whom you're meeting has to leave the meeting or the room and say, this guy's added value, and it can be completely out of the box. And that's where I think people's peripheral vision and EQ needs to be highly tuned. When you walk into the guy's office and you see out of the corner of your eye that he's a Lakers fan, and there's some way that you can give him some Lakers paraphernalia, you can make an introduction, you've done something that no one else is going to focus on. So firstly, think of, if you make enough withdrawals, the deposits, the withdrawal will take care of itself. And the other thing is, and this is very tough, I think, for the millennial generation, is be a lot more interested than interesting. Listen. And that takes away the pitch. Because at the end of the day, if you really understand what people's intestinal fortitude is, what's their risk tolerance, what bad experiences they've had before, the chances are it's going to change the way you present your fund. And the chances are you'll find the connectivity between your value proposition or your investment thesis and the person that you're meeting.
That's I think very valuable advice, and I've heard that from multiple people, and it's funny to hear it for me. And I think it's new to the show though as well, of making plenty of deposits socially, and just when you're interacting with people and making connections and building that. People buy from people they know, like, and trust. The oldest sales technique in the world,
right.
And you can't just walk in and pitch somebody. So I want to ask you further on, and by the way, who are some of the, if you can share, who are some of the people you've worked with and represented? I know the list is pretty expansive, right?
I mean, I can tell you the ones that are public knowledge, if you know, which are sort of out there. I believe my very first case out of Harvard Law School was Janet Jackson. Janet wanted to do an African American version of A Star Is Born, and through my relationship with Janet, more specifically, the person who was representing the late Michael Jackson at the time, a guy by the name of John Branca, really got an inside scoop into some of the top names in the entertainment industry. And I'll come back to what I learned from that. I was very close to MC Hammer. I mean, this was probably way before your time. I represented Manny Pacquiao for several years, mainly on branding, sponsorship, work with a number of NBA and NFL guys. I developed a value proposition to help athletes make a seamless transition from the court of the field into the business world. I was very close to forging a partnership with Derek Fisher before Derek got a call from the Knicks. Just, I guess, the public knowledge families or folks that are sort of are out there is the Tisch family. The late Larry Tisch was a seminal moment in my life. He became somewhat of a mentor, opened tremendous doors in the entertainment industry. And then I went back to Harvard Business School to a specific executive program. I sat next to Kevin Love. And it's just what I realized being around a lot of big people is the following, which is, I think, counterintuitive. They are super hyper vigilant that they're about to be hit up or about to be pitched. I mean, that's their demeanor. So if you approach people like this, and I think it's also germane to folks that have a lot of discretionary capital, and firstly, engage them in things that are as non-salesy as possible. 2, stay away from boasting, dropping names. That's really going to smack, of the red flags. And there's nothing wrong. In fact, I found in my life experience, it actually bodes well to talk about your own vulnerabilities, your own mistakes, because a lot of these folks don't get a chance to mentor or to share a lot of their raw emotions because they have to be these stoic, perfect people. And, having, as you well said in the opening comment, Bridger, having been around this sort of maybe subculture of folks for close to 3 decades, they've all had setbacks, they've all made mistakes, and they're all human beings. And that's what I think people really connect and resonate with: real authenticity, and none of this platitudes and sort of names dropping kind of stuff.
So and I'm guessing too, they'll just see through that very quickly. For sure. Right. So so what would be your advice if I was to, if I somehow had an in with some celebrity or somewhere, what would be your advice to build a relationship and network and meet that person and get in? What is it, back to what you said before, to just make more deposits than withdrawals? Anything in addition to that?
Yeah. So this is genuine. I mean, I hope this doesn't come across as contrived, because this is the way I've sort of developed a relationship, and it's sincere and it's worked very well for me. And there's a lot of psychological sort of material on this. And that is, when you meet someone, often I say this, and it's genuine: can I get your thoughts on advice on something? So what happens, their whole demeanor changes. This guy is not about to hit me up. And people love it when someone really places a premium on the benefit of their thoughts. And it's a genuine thing. Mr. X, I was involved in this situation. I found out afterwards that, my partner, he sort of overpromised. How would you handle it? People love it when you tap into a part of them that no one, it's interesting, no one takes a lot of the high profile athletes, no one takes their life experience and their intellect seriously. So seek advice. The other thing that I did, and I'll share this with your listeners, because I think it's a very different way of raising capital. I would suggest that every single one of your emerging managers creates what I call the Knights of the Round Table. Take 6 or 8 people that, the best kind of relationships that you possibly can get. And what I said is simply the following, some 30 years ago, is that I'm embarking on this venture. I know that I can't be objective. I'd like to have, a seasoned set of eyes and ears, double checking my motives to make sure that I'm honest, to make sure that I'd like you to be one of my quote unquote, knights of the round table. Tell me if you think this makes sense. It's incredible, Bridger, how many people are dying to mentor, who feel that if you seek their counsel, they are more than happy to give it. And the next step is when you feel you have the connectivity and you feel that there's the real trust and chemistry, what I've done over the years is I've asked each of the nights, if you think I'm ready, would you be happy to make 3 referrals? So right there, you've got 24 people. It's all a warm referral. It's coming from someone who you think is, carries some leverage. And now the knight, if you will, has a vested interest in making sure that these 3 people sort of meet with you, because they sort of got emotionally connected. And you're going through in a very humble sort of approach. It's maybe counterintuitive. Someone who's like myself has been understanding human nature. It not only works, it's genuine, because at the end of the day, it's all about relationships.
It's funny you bring that up. I figured this. I actually did a similar thing with my first fund. I went and found the wealthiest people I could know that I kind of had a relationship with, and I asked them to be my mentors. And I said, hey, I'm coming out with a new fund. I'd love for you to, exactly what you said, have a seasoned set of eyes to look over this. And everyone loves, especially if you're young, everyone loves to help the young guy or the young gal that's trying
100%.
to themselves. And so we sat down. I started, hey, can I pitch this to you? And I just want to hear your thoughts. And they would help me refine it, actually. And then I said, hey, what's holding you back from investing, right? And then give me some more thoughts. And I said, okay, I think I've fixed everything. And a lot of them put money in, actually. And then they, gave referrals. And we're actually, some of my first investors, a really easy way to get in the door and actually create great connections with people that are a little bit bigger and higher than me that would never really talk to me about pitching in the first place. That's great, great advice. Antony, I want to ask you about a little bit more deeper into your story. I know we hopped into a bunch of just hot topics, but if you can talk us through your story. I want to hear how, and any up, how you worked at Morgan Stanley with all these athletes and professional and working multiple funds and family offices and Harvard and all that kind of stuff. Walk us through your story and how it's kind of progressed and changed over time.
So I think that the common theme that you'll see throughout my life is, I think, 3 things. And then I'll tell you the sort of sequence. Is I've always taken the road less traveled. Because if you come at something in somewhat differently to most, by definition, there's going to be a sense of either this guy's completely whacked or there's a sense of intrigue. The second thing is just raw sincerity, raw authenticity. I've been to, I don't know how many hundreds of conferences, people talking about in platitudes about, how long have you been here before? What is the weather? It's garbage. No one really cares about those things. So be real, be sincere. And I've learned over the years, and it's a genuine thing, and it's worked, is almost every single meeting, I try and end the meeting by saying, how can I help you? And it just puts people off balance. So people don't really expect that. So I think I've had, obviously some tremendous breaks, but I've also had a number of stumbling blocks, and I've always used them hopefully as stepping stones. So when I was at Harvard Law School, the president at Harvard the Harvard University, Derek Bok, announced I want to raise $1 billion for the endowment. I had put together one of the biggest music concerts in South Africa's history, so I knew to put together a music concert. I thought I was a little bit more of a colorful character than your average HLS sort of student. And so the vice dean said, Antony, what could be the contribution of the law school to this $1 billion campaign? So I thought, I've got nothing to lose. I guess the word chutzpah is somewhat universal. So I said, I know how to put together a music concert. How about doing a music concert in the Harvard football stadium? I came up with this whole marketing idea. From that, by the way, that was the catalyst to eventually me meeting with Larry Tisch. I walked into the meeting with Larry Tisch, and I thought to myself, this guy's worth billions of dollars. He's the CEO of one of the biggest networks in the world. I'm a 20-something-year-old kid. I'm not going to go there and grovel for a job. How can I make sure that I'm adding value to this guy? So I did research on the Nielsen report, saw that NBC and ABC were surpassing CBS based on the fact that CBS had lost the youth at the time. And I presented the idea. I said, Larry, forget this parochial music concert. I'll give you exclusive rights. Let's use the CBS insignia, your logo. Let's do a 1990s Woodstock. And I saw that he could see, one second, I knew the creative juices were flowing. That led him to introduce me to Jeffrey Katzenberg, a number of the heads of the studios and the founder of CIA in LA, which was, sort of arriving. And again, I grew up, no connection to the movers and shakers. I didn't even grow up in this country. And I think what I did, when I started off in law, was I realized that instead of just being another associate, pushing a pencil around, if I could come up with ideas to bring in new clients as a young associate, it would for sure pique the interest of the managing partner. So I used my connections in South Africa. I came up with certain ideas that we could, help them on some of their legal stuff. And then what I did was and I think this is vitally important to all your listeners. You've got to be true to yourself. And I realized sort of 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now, do I want to be redlining documents, or, what are the cards that God has so-called dealt me, and what's the best way for me to play them? And I realized that I had some spheres of influence. I pivoted into the sort of Wall Street world, about 6, 7 years at UBS, Morgan Stanley. The way I built a book of business, I think, was very, very different to most people. I'll give you an example. At UBS, what I did was I thought, where's a captive audience? Where can I find people that, the idea of cold calling, it just doesn't make, firstly, it's passe today. So I'd been trained in public speaking, and I started getting gigs on cruise ships, for Kiwanis clubs, for Rotary clubs. And I educated people about ideas in investing, in money, but I always spoke about success being more than just money. It was about life and about balance. And I realized in the audience that I was already different. Most people, the average Merrill guy or the guy down the street from Smith Barney at the time, whatever, were talking about asset allocation, modern portfolio. And here was someone who had a holistic approach, and that connects with people. So it was, again, a very contrarian way of building a book of business. I've been very involved in the world of philanthropy, of sitting on boards, of giving back. That led to me, having some reasonably high-profile relationships, which was the catalyst to me being introduced by one top guy from Goldman to a global macro fund, which was my first experience as a principal, and later to a event-driven fund. And I think that I've always looked around and tried to figure out what are people grappling with, what are problems. That's when I, for example, realized that no one is focusing on helping athletes make a transition. And so I think that people, they lock themselves into a little cubbyhole or a little box, and you've got to take a step back and say, what are people struggling with? What are about unique skills? And what's the parity between the two? And the one thing for sure is I never feared failure, because I knew there's no one that I know, there's no one, Bridget, that that has achieved success at any level that hasn't failed, that hasn't, and the fear of failure was something that I didn't fear. And I think that what I've come to realize is if you add value to people's lives, if you're genuine, if you're sincere, and if you have the ability, which is crazy and obvious, to say, I don't know. When a person asks you something, just be honest and be humble. There's a lot of people who wing it. And I think just a culmination of thinking out of the box, looking for people's pain points and values, not trying to sell, but rather trying to make a deposit, just being good to people, and trying to always be responsive. Small things, if you understand that someone's having a tough time with one of their kids, try and figure out how you can add value. It'll come back tenfold in the business world. And I've seen this now, obviously having done this for some time, and I guess if people could think less myopically and think about, it's all about giving and solving problems and finding solutions, as opposed to selling it, closing. It just doesn't work, because that's transactional as opposed to relationship orientation.
I love that. I think that's spot on. Where were you born, by the way?
So I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Okay.
My formative years in South Africa, and it's very interesting, because I think of myself much more as, I think I have a much more global, a much broader way of looking at things. I don't think in parochial terms.
Yeah.
But it's all, at the end of the day, it's all about people. It's all about people. It's about relationships. And the one thing, people may not remember what you said in a meeting. They may not remember the kind of asset, but they'll remember how they felt. And if you're sincere and you care, there's a deep sense of a kindred connection. And people, as you well said, people want to do business with someone that they feel they connect with, and there's some sense of trust. And that's, I believe, the common denominator between most successful people.
That's so interesting. It's funny you say that too. The first time we met was in Miami in a small conference room, and I totally remember how I felt being around you. I remember, oh man, it was just fun being around Antony Gordon. He's cracking jokes, making fun that I had a porn size. You know, you're just making all sorts of funny jokes. So,
and that's another thing, Bridget. I'm telling you, humor. People take themselves too seriously. You know.
Yeah.
It's and everyone is nervous, and everyone comes to a networking event, you know, with these little shoelaces with their names, and they feel like a dork. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a matter of turning the world upside down. We've all had whacked out experiences, and just be real, man.
I love it. Now, let's talk through what you're doing currently. You mentioned it just a second ago, but you're helping athletes transition. Can you walk us through what you're doing currently and your current business model and
sure, why
you found that niche and how you got into it?
So there's a few things that I'm doing concurrently. In terms of specifically that, it's an entity that I formed called LAST, the acronym Life After Sport Transition. So here's what happens in the world of high-end sport. As soon as the muscles atrophy, they're no use to the agent. The agents are transactional, so he's gone. The business manager doesn't return the calls anymore because, you know, his source of revenue is gone. But what people don't realize is that you've got a person, and the average guy in the NFL has about a three-year career. The NBA is slightly longer. These guys usually have some discretionary capital if they've been successful. They've been pitched a number of ideas, and there's nobody walking them to the next stage. So here's the model in that sort of silo of what I do. Replace the revenue that they've lost because they're obviously no longer playing. And that is relationships that we've got with major speaking bureaus, with top public relations firms who are looking for athletes to be speakers, to be, to represent their brand. We replaced the coach, the sports coach, with a life coach. Why? Because we found that most times where you see headline news where an athlete runs into problems is when he's out of schedule, during the off season, or if you keep the guy in schedule, a sense of accountability, and that there's somebody that absolutely says, I believe in you, it's the wheels won't come off. That we found some guys who've got robust social media platforms. We help them monetize that. There's certain technology, and I think most importantly, we get to know the family, and we get a sense of 3, 5, 7 years from now, where do you want to be? How do you want to give back? And I will, I said to Manny Pacquiao, if I walked into a boxing ring, within about 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, I'm brain damaged. And I said to Manny, you walk into a boardroom, within 2 minutes, they're going to eat your lunch, So it's a matter of, anytime someone pitches you, I'll be the bad guy. Just say, speak to that weird looking guy with a funny accent. And so once you have that trust of a quarterback, and you've helped people make the transition, you've replaced the revenue, you help them realize this get rich quick is garbage. It becomes by word of mouth, because it's a very incestuous community. That this person's different. They're not trying to get selfies. They don't want signed jerseys on my leg. This person really cares. So that's one part of it. The secondly, in the philanthropy world, I've sort of merged two things together. That is philanthropy and successful entrepreneurial ideas. How do you raise dough using out-of-the-box ideas in the 501c3 world? And having sat on a lot of large boards, we have high-end retreats. We do things. The worst thing that you can possibly do in the charity world is call people and hit them up for a donation. I mean, it's not so. They've got to feel that you're adding value, that you buy in. So that's sort of the philanthropy entrepreneurial model. And then I'm involved. I'm consulting with a full service sort of professional service firm that does everything. They've got a deep bench of business management. They do all the accounting, auditing, etc. I don't want to be the guy that executes. I want to be, the most important thing I believe is the relationship.
Yeah.
So I know what I'm not good at. I know that I don't want to have a back office. It's not a good use of my time. So I have a strategic relationship with a group that's primarily out of New York. And then there's a handful of families that I'm very, very close to that are looking for, specific ideas, alternative investments. There's one or two families right now that are looking to purchase soccer teams or football teams for tax and other reasons. So I think at this point in my career, I've sort of tried to hone in on the areas where I can best add value, best leverage the relationships that I've sort of made a lot of deposits in. And it's very much about the quality of life, because I always remind people, in the rat race world, that the person who wins the rat race is still a rat, and you got to be aware of, like Bridget, the conference that you and I met in. It's really about balance. It's really about your relationships, your health. And if you don't have any sense of meaning or purpose in your life, besides if your entire self-worth is synonymous with your net worth, it's going to be a very lonely and scary journey, because money comes and goes. Relationships and, the purpose of being in this world is something, obviously that has longevity and stands the test of time.
I love that. And I think that's right on point. I'm curious too, from your angle, going deeper with working with, successful athletes and clients, what have you seen on the outside of money, on the relationship, on their spiritual side of things? Where have you seen wealthy families do very well and excel, and where have you seen them crack? And what is some, we're hoping everybody on this show is going to be one of those families one day and be super wealthy and have a great, but a lot of problems come with it, as you've probably seen. What are some things that advice to someone that's maybe going to be, up and coming, or maybe just exited their company for a huge sum of money? What would be your advice to them to keep relationships, spiritual, and other aspects of their life intact and good?
Okay, so here's what I did. I want to get my bearings. It was about 7 or 8 years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago. There was a guy that I met in Zurich. At the time, according to Forbes, I think his net worth was 19 point something billion. Now, everyone's dead scared of this guy. Everyone's like paying homage. I happened to go to school in South Africa with his wife, who's a very sweet woman. So I think chutzpah has, sort of become my middle name, and hopefully this is going to answer your question. So here's what I did. I took a piece of paper. I drew like a half circle. I said, Martin, which is not his name. I said, Martin, when were you born? He said, whatever, 1954. I put a dash next to 1954. And I said, obviously, I hope you have a long and healthy life. I gave him a pen. And I said, assuming that's your tombstone, what do you want that to say? So the guy, the blood, literally, I could see it. The guy was ashen. It's the same sort of concept in public speaking that I often do is, Bridget, you're 98 years old. There's 99 candles on the cake. To your right is your beautiful significant other, your family who I've met, your closest buddies, some of the folks that you work with. There's a boom mic that's going around. What do you want them to say about you? So I will tell you that I've been around people that have worked billions and billions of dollars that clearly have ascended up the ladder and it's completely leaning against the wrong wall. They're extremely lonely and it's a very hollow victory. So what I would say to people is get a sense of the following. What's the legacy that you want to leave? Because what you want to leave behind, your name, your values, your traits, the baton that you're going to pass to your kids is, it's terrific that they've got money, but they, what do you stand for? Because if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything. You've got to stand for something, otherwise you'll fall for anything. And I saw that, by the way, with your family as well. I can see that the conversations are much broader, than purely financial. So it's the most important thing is, number one, put the big rocks in first, which is your relationships, the way you treat people, your wife, your kids. Number two, and this is the hardest thing, especially in a podcast like this, is you got to ask the most existential question: and also, what's the meaning of what's the purpose of this? Because in anyone who's intellectually honest, Bridget, and I've said this on stages at Forbes events, no intellectually honest person, at least that I've met, will say, Antony, here's the point. The idea is you come down to this earth, you collect as many toys as possible, then you go into a pine box, you get eaten by worms. I mean, it's just insane. So people do have some visceral sense, there's an accountability of the kind of life that I've got. So if people, and it's so against pop culture, but if you peel the onion and you ask, what's the reason why I'm here? People will realize very quickly that it's not a mile wide and an inch thick. It cannot possibly be that your whole worth is synonymous with your financials. So that's, get a sense of why you're in this world. And
so put relationships in first, you said the big, and then an understanding of why you're here and making sure that's a priority. Okay, I love it. Sorry, keep going.
Okay, and then the idea is of taking time out to invest in your most important relationship, invest in giving back, invest in trying to refine, parts of one's character or one's traits that maybe are raw. The people that I've a lot of athletes over the years who struggle with anger or who struggle with, being narcissistic, find areas that are true accomplishments. People who, whose father figure was a belligerent anger person. You don't, you can make yourself into the kind of person that you want people to like by refining those parts of your traits, your characters. That takes a lot of work. There's nothing that makes a person feel more of a sense of accomplishment when they do those things themselves. I recently spoke at an event and I spoke about the success of IKEA. IKEA is not because it's just terrific furniture at a reasonably cheap price. They did research on IKEA. It's actually a Harvard Business School white paper, and they found that one of the success of IKEA is the sense of people, the accomplishment of doing something themselves. They're putting together a piece of furniture. It's bizarre, Bridger, but when they look back, they have a sense of that little couch. I did something to be, to participate. It wasn't handed to me, which is one of the reasons, by the way, and I've seen this many times where I've been involved with families that are worth billions, and they sort of give their kids a trust fund of hundreds and hundreds of millions, and those kids are juvenile delinquents. There's no sense of value. They feel there's no sense of dignity. That's the concept of, take the things that how you want to be remembered, work on the parts that need refining, work on the relationships, which are the most sacrosanct, most important parts of one's life, take time out to give back. In terms of the money parts, if people trust you, if you made the deposit, if people know that you're authentic, you're 80% of the way there.
Those are wise words. Something I want to emphasize too, I think a lot of people, and I think you can probably speak to this too, I think a lot of people have this disgust for wealthy people right now in their mouth, like Eat the Rich campaign, all that kind of stuff. And it is true, there are nasty wealthy people, but in my experience, maybe you can, maybe be different in your experience. I've seen a lot of wealthy people who have the wealth, but they also have great families and great relationships, and they have a healthy body, and they have seemingly mastered almost every aspect of their life. Now, some others haven't done that, but I've actually seen more often than not that they actually they've actually done what you're saying. They've gone and thought through those harder questions and deposited in relationships and family and kids, and actually have great kids that are doing great things. Have you seen a similar experience, or what's kind of percentage of wealthy people have you seen? Does it corrupt them, or does it make them good and better and they do incredible things with their wealth? What have you seen in your experience?
So it's amazing. I happened to have a conversation with someone who was at the same conference where you and I met. And here was my observation. Most of the people at this conference were from Salt Lake City, Utah. I saw an incredible sense of balanced people that were focused, would put the big rocks in first. It's very different to the conferences that I saw in Silicon Valley. So I'll give you a statistical fact. There are more shrinks per capita in Silicon Valley than any other location in the United States. I think I think the subtext is clear. All the money in the world is certainly not going to buy you happiness. And this idea of, out Lamborghini and out Ferraring the guy next to you is, it's a very insidious and it's a very superficial life. They all realize it's amazing, Richard, because I walk in there. I think I'm an unpretentious guy. I'm a little bit different because I happen to be an Orthodox Jewish guy, and I walk in there with a frisbee on my head, and very different to I think that people get a sense of, like, when a call comes in and it's one of my kids, and I say, "Do you mind?" The guy's worth $25 billion. The things that money cannot buy are the real sense of one's true wisdom, one's true happiness, one's true longevity. To answer your question, it's very interesting. I think that by and large, I've seen that the wealthy people that I deal with are good folks. They care. A lot of them in the quietness of a meeting will say, "Antony, I'm not a genius. I've had some good breaks." It's the guys that try and show that, it's my unique. When push comes to shove, be humble, realize you had the breaks. The guy that was sitting right next to you could have had the same break. So I think that the folks that have the humility, and the folks that don't hoard, the folks that want to give back, the folks that realize it's by the grace of God, and the truth of the matter is they're just the conduit, and they're the shepherd. God can choose anyone. They're usually the balanced people. I've seen a disproportional dysfunctionality in super well people in Silicon Valley, frankly. The subculture there is not that healthy. It used to be a lot in the New York culture that I was part of. Because New York has changed so much, I don't see that. What I'm seeing today a lot is people really want to make a difference. People want to give. People, I think maybe it's because we've just been through the most challenging year in most of people's lives, and there's people have been humbled, and it's impossible coming out of a pandemic, not to have done some reflection and say, one second, I've seen people around me either disappear, become ill. It shook up a lot of people. So I will tell you that what I've seen with a lot of wealthy people, which is the saddest thing, is loneliness. And I think they then realize that, that really the most precious things in the world, money cannot buy.
Interesting. Yeah, that's more shrinks per capita in Silicon Valley. I didn't know that. That's pretty wild. That's Antony, I want to ask you just a couple final closing questions. I know you got to run in just a minute. Number one is, where can people go to learn more about you? I know you've got a fantastic podcast, fantastic show. You've got a ton of stuff, but give us a few links and places where people can go to find out more about you.
So, the Antony Gordon Show, which was started a couple of years ago, as someone who's on the speaking circuit, what I realized is that I've been blessed to be to, I think, some of the best known educational institutions, and I did not learn about life, wisdom, and how to navigate the vicissitudes of life at Oxford or Harvard. They don't teach that. So I realized that life wisdom and some of the tools to navigate through the landmines of life are just not out there. So of years and years of developing content, and a lot of it is faith-based. A lot of it is because I've done a number of courses on life coaching. I come from a family that's my late mom is a well-known therapist. So you'll see embedded in my podcast a lot of, if you will, the GPS for life to help hopefully ignite a little bit of a spark in a dark world. You will see, so that's number one. One thing I don't say, and I think I said this to you at the event, I don't hold myself up publicly. I happen to take rabbinical ordination as a purely intellectual exercise because I really wanted to take, hit the highest possible. So my Hebrew name, which it's a very guttural name, so I think that we can, I give a free frisbee to anyone who can say the word Hanan. But if you look at rabbihanangordon.com, you'll see a lot of my public stuff. You'll see years and years of a lot of stuff on, workshops, retreats, stuff like that. I am right now, I just signed an NDA, so I'm not supposed to say. I'm in the middle of writing a book. It's going to be, I'm told, going to be coming out in June, and it's going to be coming up with Simon & Schuster in about June. So there's a lot of exciting things ahead. And I will say, as someone who's been through, what you've been through, I want to give a shout out to you. I'll tell you, I thought about this before the show, and I saw it was actually one of the topics of one of your episodes. What you're doing, Bridget, is an amazing thing, and I'll tell you why. For some reason, people in the hedge fund world want to keep this mystique. want to keep the fact that, you, as you said, I think in your preamble, you have to have gone to Harvard. You have to, either have 3 houses in Greenwich and a yacht in the south of France. What you're doing, which I think is fabulous, is you're giving people paint by number, methodologies, and you're making it user-friendly. I think that's absolutely fantastic. It is threatening to certain people because for their own self-aggrandizement and this, and their need to be elite, you're making it much more accessible. But I think it's absolutely fantastic what you're doing. And I think that at the end of the day, everyone should earmark a certain amount of the capital into the alternative space. I'm very biased into the hedge fund world. So I think what you're doing is fantastic. But I also think what you're doing, just having just heard a few episodes, is that your style is not an interview, it's a discussion. You're very engaging. It's very it's not about the highest possible IRR sharp ratio. It's a much more holistic approach. So I think that's very, very healthy, because otherwise people think of the hedge fund world as this pedagogical academic laboratory. It's about people, it's about relationship, it's a business. So I think that you're doing terrific things.
Well, thank you, Anthony. And it's been a pleasure having you on. I want to ask you finally, we got 2 minutes left, let's say. I want to open the mic. You got the free mic. What is your advice to the next generation of entrepreneurs or fund managers or just people living in America? What is something you would like to leave with this group that's listening today? You got the open mic for 2, maybe 3 minutes. What's your best advice to distill on the next generation of people coming through the business world?
Okay, so firstly, I would say the following. I speak to a ton of people that say, Anthony, I'd love to develop this business idea. I'd love to get involved in this, but you don't understand. I'm some kid that lives in some small town in North Carolina. I don't have. There's an optical illusion out there that there's suddenly the right time where Warren Buffett calls you, you get an inheritance. That's never ever gonna happen in every single one of our lives. And I've spoken at, I think by now it's fair to say, to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Every person that I speak to says, Anthony, you're great. You've got a funny accent. You're a cool guy, but you don't get it. There's a storm in my life. My folks just got divorced, or I'm trying to get into it. My friends, I'm here to tell you there's a storm in every single one of our lives. That every listener and every one of you has got some thorn in your side, has got something that's bothering you. And the one piece of wisdom I'd like to leave you with is that we're not in this world to wait for the storm to subside. We're here to dance in the rain. Meaning, you got to take the cards that you've been dealt. It's an optical illusion to wait for this nirvana moment when the dust's going to be quiet. You're going to hear the chirping of the crickets. A beautiful. That is in the movies. In life, you've got to take the challenges that you got. You got to take the imperfections. You got to take that the world is not perfect. That it's not fair. That people who are not necessarily the nicest people, sometimes get the breaks. Forget your next door neighbor. Forget the person behind you. Forget people who are telling you should be X. You take some time, figure out what are your best assets. Where do you want to be 3, 5, 7 years from now? What do you want people to be saying about you when you turn 99? Don't wait for the perfect nirvana. It'll never happen. Dance in the rain, take your skills, and you'll look back in your life. You'll be better for it. You'll live a more wholesome and richer life. And most importantly, I think you'll have a happier and more meaningful life.
Wow. I love it. We just end right there. Anthony, thank you so much again. The Anthony Gordon Show. Go check it out. Find Anthony online, all the stuff. We'll put the links below. Thank you again so much, Anthony, for coming on.
Anytime, Bridget. You're a good man. Keep up the good work.
You too. Thanks, man. See ya.
Cheers.